Welcome back to Box to Battlefield. Good to see you all again. As you know, guys, we're getting close to the end of the King Tiger. We have a few episodes to shoot, but one of the things that we have to concentrate on are the whole length of the tank. You know, as you guys know, I like to turn little teeny things into little projects. And when they're put all together, your tank sings. So I don't like to neglect anything on the tank, and that means track and the rear end jack that'll sit here and the mufflers and all that sort of stuff. But I even include inside these armored protective shields for the mufflers. You have to go in behind here and paint them. Now, why do we do that? Well, it's just one more, it's just one more thing that's satisfying knowing that it's done, and also too, no one's going to look down these shrouds when they're all put together and see beige plastic. There's nothing worse for, say, myself who judges, or you guys who judge out in the different shows in your neighborhoods. I don't want to look for flaws in models when I judge. That's a terrible thing to do. I'd rather look for the positive things. A lot of judges start with a number and work down as they subtract points for negative or mistakes that a modeler might make. I start all the models that I judge at 0. Every model on that table is a 0, and then I start giving points and points, and the roses will rise amongst the thorns, guys. You don't ever have to worry about that. If you do a super job on deckling and a super job on this sort of thing, and certain jobs such as mufflers and tracks and all that sort of stuff, if you start adding all these things up, that number is just going to increase. So it's a much better feeling as a judge too. If you go into a modeling room and you're going to judge for an hour, and all you're doing is being negative for an hour, as far as starting, say, with a number, just to throwing out the number 10, and then start subtracting. You know what? At the end of that hour, you're in a miserable mood because all you've done has been negative. If you start with 0 on the models and start giving everything a point for this and a point for that, it's all a positive thing that I like to do. So at the end of the hour, I'm in a good mood. I've just given all kinds of points to beautiful models. So the way to earn those points, and this goes down into your own model when if you're not a guy who competes at model shows and that sort of thing, just do that stepping stone thing in your own home, in your own workbench. You have your model almost complete. Take out a scorecard of, say, 12, and you're going to study your model and you're going to give it points up to a maximum of 12. Just start looking at decals, silvering on decals, track alignment, any seams, proper exhaust systems, proper weathering due to the theater of war that they're in, that sort of thing. And if you start adding instead of subtracting, at the end of that 12, and you get up to maybe the number 10 or maybe the number 9, you're just going to feel positive. You're going to feel better. Instead of starting at 12 and subtracting, pretty soon you're going to look at your model and say, what a lump. So don't engage in going from high to low. Engage from low to high, and guarantee you it'll be positive all the way around. So that's why I look after painting things like this the proper color, and spending time on things that sometimes other modelers might neglect a little bit. In the end, it just makes my performance on that particular workbench space, say 20 hours into the King Tiger, it's just a more positive outlook on the whole thing. So, having said that, let's look at these mufflers another time and see where we're at with them. All I've done since seeing you last, has just give this a little wash of industrial earth, very thin down over top of the housing itself. And now I'm going to paint the insides of these, and I don't think we're going to have to spend a lot of film time doing that. I'm pretty sure you guys get the drill. One of the again, my favorite color for doing this sort of thing is a manhole street cover, which is that sort of color. But I'm going to soften the blow a little bit just because we're dealing with heat here and we need to warm it up. So a little bit of XF60 tossed in just to warm it up a little bit is where I'm going to go with that. So what I'll do is I'll mix my paints, show you what I'm going to do. And this one here is obviously unpainted and this one's painted. It's not going to matter on the inside, the fact that this is not going to have pre-shading on it. So I'm going to quickly spray those up, and then we're going to get into a little bit of groundwork on the back end of this tank. And as you can see, these jack holders I haven't even painted yet because I'm going to paint the whole mud and what have you on there jet black first. So if you're viewing this from afar, don't worry that these aren't painted. They're going to be jet black. That'll act as my my primer going forward. So let me just mix up the paints, spray those. I'll spray the little mufflers themselves, these little exhaust stacks with the same sort of color. Put a little bit of pigment on, and I'll let the cameras move in a little closer as I do that. So just give us a second and we'll carry on. Thank you. All right, gentlemen, so as you guys know, I like to spray with Tamiya lacquers mixed with Tamiya paints. And to warm it up, what exactly do you mean by that when you say you warm it up for colors? Because as you guys know, that my scratching colors are these two combined, and some of the other colors, which is XF9 and XF69, NATO black. But to warm it up, it's like bringing flowers into a dining room setting. The dining room looks great. Add some flowers and nice artwork. It just warms it up. It's got that warm and fuzzy. And why is it necessary in this tin of paint? I mean, we're talking. I guess because I worked in the interior design business a long time ago. These things come natural to me, and it's hard to explain to you guys at times. But just by adding maybe 20% of this gives this just another little tone. That's not as harsh as these two tones. The yellow here softens it a little bit. And then I'm going to, as you guys also know, there's a lot of ish in my measurements. But I'm going to try to measure this at around 60% thinner. And these little cups are great. As you guys know, I've gone on to these little cups, which are Mr. Hobby, mixing cups. They have a nice little spout on them. As you guys know, I sometimes mix inside the cup of the airbrush, but I'm trying to get into better working habits after watching Dave Forrest. He's got better habits than I do. And by the way, he's just not on film, obviously, but in his private collection, he's just working on the Ming Panther. And he's just about finished for a Kursk theme that's at a local show here in Guelph, Ontario, November 4th. And holy Toledo, it's a fantastic looking Panther tank. Hats off to Dave. He's a fantastic modeler. All right. Obviously, this is going to show up much better when we get onto the tank part that's not been painted gray first. But one of the reasons for doing this is to show you all the reasons for pre-shading and all that sort of stuff. And again, these are areas of the tank that most judges and most people aren't going to see. But nevertheless, they're worth doing. If you just leave it with bare plastic, it's not nearly as. So you see how that yellow has changed my manhole sort of rusty, irony color. It's almost got a pastel look to it. And I'm going to purposely leave these two pieces a different shade, pre-shaded and not pre-shaded, simply because they look better on the back of the tank. They're just a little more interesting. One's dark gray with a little bit of heat, and one's got the sort of red tone to it. And that's simply because we'll just pretend that our little tank has one of these damaged, and he's moved back to the shop to get a brand new one put on. Alright, so now the exhaust stacks. And the exhaust stacks, I'm just going to use the same color. Now, standing these up is a different story. Just lean it against our airbrush stand. And I'm going to liven this part of the tank up in a few seconds with a little bit of pigment. And probably add a little bit of Tamiya Flesh number 15 to our mixture, and also spray that on as well. So let's let these dry for a second. And then we'll get out our Tamiya Flesh color, give it an overall spray, and then we're pretty much finished with the exhaust. I might even dabble a little bit in some powders, but those will have to thoroughly dry first, which will, being acrylic, dry pretty quick. So we'll add a little bit of this too. So let me get out the flesh colors, and then we'll carry on. Okay, so as we move on, these are now dry. So now I'm going to just give it with a very, very thin layer of X15. And again, I talk warmth here. There's obviously a lot of red in this color. I'm going to mix it. Just I've put about a quarter cup of thinner, just lacquer thinner. Now I'm just going to take my dollar store brush, dip it in, and that gives me about a 98% thinner ratio to paint. So just test it, make sure there's and I'm just going to hit the bottom part of these exhaust stacks, just so there's a little variety of color. See, so it's just a faint little change of color there. Do the same on this one. And where am I taking these colors from, guys? I just study a work site, you know, where there's Caterpillar tractors and what have you around. It's nothing, I'm not splitting the atom here, gentlemen. I'm just visiting. I'll just put a little dash of our little warm color in here as well. And again, it's a very, very, you probably can't even see it, especially if you're watching the videos on a telephone. You probably can't even see what I just did there. But let's just hope that you can. And again, like say Mike Rinaldi in the tank art books, he's always layering and layering and layering, and in the end, your model's got a lot of depth on it. So if you look at these exhaust stacks now, they're actually 4 colors, you know. Very you know, much better, much nicer painter than say, you know, just take an XF9 and airbrushing the whole 9 yards and away you go, and the whole job's done in, you know, a minute and a half. I spent 15 minutes, get 4 colors on there, and then it's no time used, and it's just more interesting. So now what I'm going to do is I've taken some rusty pigments, burnt sienna from the Vallejo pigment line, number 73.106, and I'm just going to dab a little bit of that on as well. And it's more of a stipple than it is anything else, guys. It's not a up and down, north and south type of thing. There, so in another 40 seconds, we've got another color added. And again, the other thing to study for this sort of thing, because they do it better than anybody, I think, is the 48 scale guys doing their exhaust stacks on their, you know, their 109s and their P51s and their Spitfires. Those guys can paint. So just get around to the model show and copy what they're up to. See, so now right away, and as you know, guys, the subject matter that we're dealing with our King Tiger is very front heavy. You know, we've got those shell hits in the front. We've got it's going to be collapsed on its torsion bars, and it's going to be sort of guided in at the front end of the model, bringing interest to the rear end of the model. And we're going to go into depth in a second about that with the weathering and what have you. All very important. You know, we don't want the model front heavy. We want interest all the way around the model. That's why last episode, as you guys know, we spent a lot of time on the little cleats and the tow cable clamps and that sort of thing. Very important to do. Again, so that our model is balanced versus, you know, front loaded. So keep all these things in mind when you're doing your project, and it'll really help out the final result. And like I say, Dave and I, we just provide kindling for the fire that you guys actually have, and all it's going to take is for Dave and I, and in this case, you know, like perfect example is the sales of this King Tiger since this project started. You know, I would have a King Tiger here without these videos going on here at the hobby shop for maybe 2 or 3 months at Tamiya King Tiger. Since these videos started, thanks to you guys, we've sold half a dozen King Tigers. You know, so all those things also keep this YouTube going. You know, it adds enthusiasm, and the guys are, you know, it's just more interesting. It's why are the guys buying the King Tigers all of a sudden? I mean, the King Tigers on the market now, Tacom and what have you, Ming, fantastic models. Fortunately for me, you guys are buying Tamiya King Tigers. So it works all the way around, and it's an enjoyment for me. It makes me feel great when the King Tigers go out the door. And the nice thing is too, guys, is that maybe because of the type of channel that this is, a learning exercise, because of the 6 or 7 King Tigers that I've sold them to younger people, you know, and that's a real bonus, because I don't want to have a young person buying a Tacom King Tiger. That would be nonsense to do that. He would get bogged down in that tank model, and that would be the end of it. This Tamiya kit, he can spend $40 or $50 buying it, a little bit of paint, and by the time he's spent $60, he's away to the races, and you know, enjoyment all the way through. No hurdles and all that sort of stuff that those complicated kits can provide. So another great thing that's happened over shooting this over the last couple months has been the response of you guys purchasing the model itself. It is flattering to me, so keep it up. I appreciate it. Anyway, what we'll do is and as you guys saw when I was rambling on there, I added a little bit of this pigment, Vallejo pigment, to the back end of the muffler here. Again, one more bit of layering. And as you guys have recognized too, that these are basic techniques, but the result is quite often advanced, and that seems to be getting through as well, you know. There's no reason to get complicated on all this. This is a pastime, it's not a job. So keep that in mind when you're going through this. So one of the things, we'll shut the camera down for a few minutes while I do some prep work here, but I'll move our mufflers and what have you out of the way. But we'll carry on in the back end of the tank, and we'll get that all weathered up. One of the things I've done is I've taken some weld bond. This is off camera now. This is earlier this morning. I've taken weld bond and I've put a little bead along here, and then I've just added some sand from our sandbox. And it has to be small, and the granulars have to be tiny. So you have to siphon a little bit, but you have to get the smallest of sand. And I've applied that to the weld bond, I would suppose an hour and a half ago. So it's hard, it's ready to paint. So what we're going to do is we're going to paint it jet black like I always do with my Groundwork. And then bring it up with some buff and what have you, and then attach our muffler system on, and anyway, do some weathering up the back. Like I say, this tank is sort of front loaded, so we'll get some interest back in here too. So let me prepare the paints, and then we'll paint the weathering. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in just a second. Okay, so as you guys know, an hour and a half ago or so, I put the weld bond on that, added the dirt. But just to show you what I mean by that, is just I have the weld bond. You can get this at your local hardware store, and I just put it on the model. Now, again, I'm overdoing it here. This stuff, the sand that I'm going to apply, takes very little. You don't have to. You can do it with water as well, water and glue. Just All right. Now, you need the finest of sand in 35th scale. And believe it or not, this sand has been screened. Do it over something so that when it falls, you can save it. So don't get your sand obviously at a beach, but I think most of us have gone past that. I think I think that you guys all know that. And I'm not getting into covering that up. This tank is going to be so low to the ground once we drop the suspension that none of that is going to matter. But as you can see, now it's packed down. Now that'll take 20 minutes to dry. And now one of the other things you can add, and we'll be adding this to the track, but these are static grass, and it doesn't ever hurt to add that sort of into your formula. And this static grass always adds a nice texture to your model, so I'll add a little bit of that too. We'll get some weld bond out just to show you guys. So and this is made by Knock. It's wild grass, and it comes in a variety of colors. Hard to get though. It's not at your local hobby shop necessarily. You're gonna have to go to a train store for that. But Hornet Hobbies has it, and I just mix it up a little bit with my fine stones. And again, this Knock grass is the same stuff that I use on all my dioramas and stuff. It doesn't matter which color. If your local hobby shop has only got sort of the Augusta green kind of color, don't worry about it. You're going to airbrush it, and it doesn't matter if the grass comes in purple, because the kind of weathering that we've come to do, the color of the grass is not important. We're gonna paint it all kinds of colors. So what I mean by that is all our earth tones that you guys and I are used to with our Tamiya colors are going to change the color of the grass. So I'm going to paint it jet black anyway. So like I say, it doesn't matter if the grass is from a costume shop, and this being Halloween time, you're going to be able to find that sort of stuff at a Halloween shop. Different costume things. So like I say, it doesn't matter what color it is, because as you guys are going to see in a minute, I'm going to paint it all jet black and then go over it with Tamiya buff. So don't worry about the color. Okay, so let me get out now. In this case, because I'm going to want a sort of a moist ground that I'm working on here, we're dealing with the King Tiger. Maybe shortly after the Battle of the Bulge, maybe January or February 1945. So based on the fact that it's January or February, the ground and that sort of stuff in Europe is moist, dark brown kind of color, all that damp, lousy stuff that we sort of have going on right now, being that it's almost November. The ground is going to be not frozen. Different from Canada or northern United States, the groundwork in Europe is, not frozen very long. At least where the Americans were traveling through in 1945. Obviously, in Moscow and in certain parts of Russia, it certainly gets frozen, but not where we're, Battle of the Bulge type of setting. So, yes, there was snow and that sort of thing, but suddenly at the end of the day, temperature would rise up again and melt the snow, the moisture would get into the sand and dirt. So that's the kind of feeling we want. So we're not going to be having any light colors on this. It's just going to be sort of a muddy sort of situation with our groundwork. So keep that in mind too. And what color do we have? I think we still have the Tamiya flesh in there, but I'm just going to pour the black right on over top of it. And I use gloss black. And there's a reason I use the gloss black, which is XF. No, sorry, not XF. It's X1. And again, it's because I want that hint of gloss coming back through the model. Gloss being that it's going to give a sense of moisture and dampness in the groundwork itself. So this all at the front here that we just applied is going to dry in 20 minutes. But like I say, the back stuff here has been drying all morning. So let's get some paint on that. And probably with that mixture of flesh that's in there, it's gonna again add a little bit of it's gonna be sort of a dirty brown that we're gonna do here, and that's all appropriate. And I'm gonna go up the model back end here. I'm gonna go as high as the muffler settings. So there's still lots of thinner. Like the mixture of this black color, I would suggest, and I don't know for sure, but I would say that it's at least 65% thinner. And there's the jack setting for the tank. And then what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to, and you remember we were practicing the 214 on the bottom of the tank a couple episodes ago. And I don't care if they remain or they don't remain. They're really going to be impossible to see once we lower the suspension on the tank. Okay, so let me, so there's the kind of look that we have. And now I'm going to spray right over top of that with Tamiya Buff. So what I'll do is I'll clean out the airbrush properly so that there's no remnants of black and Tamiya flesh and what have you. I'll clean out the airbrush properly. It'll just take me a minute. And a note to the airbrush. Some guys are under the belief that you have to strip this whole thing down because you're changing colors. You're going from jet black to a buff color. Don't worry about your airbrush not performing. As you guys know, I use so much thinner in this airbrush mixed with the paints that basically what I spray my model with is dirty thinner. So the model or the airbrush itself is not getting dirty. It's not accumulating with dry tip and all that sort of stuff. There's no accumulation of stale paint in here at all. It's lively because of the lacquer thinner that we're using. So I'm not gonna, when I say I'm gonna clean out my airbrush, I basically mean I'm dumping out the black, giving it a fresh spray through of clean lacquer, and then going right onto the buff. I'm not going to be interrupted too much by looking after my airbrush. Now at the end of the setting today, at the end of the day, when you've are starting to pack up, leave yourself 7 or 8 minutes at the end of the day to thoroughly give your airbrush the proper TLC that it needs. But changing from black to white is not an issue. Just carry on with it with a stretch of clean thinner in between. So let me do that, and I'll be back with you in about 30 seconds. Thank you. Okay, so in actual fact, this front end dried fortunately quick enough. When I was cleaning the airbrush, this was obviously doing its thing, so I fired up a little bit of gloss black and sprayed it too. Cleaned the airbrush again and carried on. So, but this is thoroughly dry. So now what I'm going to do, and even though this is going to be a moist, dark, damp situation with this mud, you still need a little bit of buff to ride up in the back end here. So I've already added the thinner. I'm going to add a little hint of buff. And then we'll add the darker brown colors and but let's add a little buff to the and I'm taking the buff pretty high up the tank, you know, into the north end of into our green and red camouflage patterns. Then I'll just give it the as you can see, the stones, the little granulars of sand that we added are now starting to pop a little bit. You can just see, I mean, that's not highlighted. That's simply, you know, just adding a little bit of glow to the So now look, I'll turn the tank around so that it's in operational mode, and it's already starting to cook. And then we have 3 more colors to add to this, but it's got at least that nice foundation of dirt and grime to it. And I'll just give the front end a hint of our buff too. And the advantage I have, and you know how the airplane guys like to say, oh, just put some mud on it, you make a little mistake. Well, we're going to take full advantage of that when we go and glue the top to the bottom. You know, there's obviously going to be a seam across here that I can easily mud out. And there's our stretch of grass from our situation with this tank, and you can see how the grass, it doesn't matter at all what color we started with, totally changed now. So anyway, now we'll start working on the other colors. We've got our buff sort of working properly. See how the sand is hopped out now? Now, unfortunately, once this gets into the groundwork and everything, what we've just painted isn't going to show too much. You know, obviously this is going to be facing down towards the groundwork, so I don't expect you guys to spend a lot of time on this. As you guys saw, the whole process took less than 5 minutes, but it's a good learning exercise too. This tank's going to be sitting like this, and you're never going to see much of what I just did, but as a learning and a lesson exercise for maybe groundwork or a tank that's in a diorama where you have it half turned over, you know, it's an easy lesson to reflect back on, because as you can see, with spraying the buff over top of the gloss black, those sand pebbles now have a little more purpose. They shine now. So now I'm just going to add some oil paints, and then we're basically done with this. And then we'll shut her down for the week, and then get right back onto we'll start doing the track and what have you. I've got some neat little ways of showing you how to use the Tamiya track versus aftermarket track in a nice convincing way too. So I'm not opposed to using Fruel tracks or model casting tracks, not at all. But also too, to take this tank and make something out of the tracks that come with it that is probably 25-year-old kit. Why not use it as an exercise? And so that's what we'll get after once we finish off with the oil paints with this. Next week we'll talk about the track. So anyway, let's finish off with this. So let me go and mix some oil paints, and I'll be right with you. Thank you. Okay, so now we've gotten rid of the airbrush. We've added our little buff, Tamiya XF57. We've sprayed it gently over the surface here. Now we're going to take a little bit of MIG 1402 is the thing. It's fresh mud color. Now I've dipped into here. I have in here just some thinner, just basically Humbrol enamel thinners. Just because I don't want it to be full strength, I want it to be mid. And I'm just going to add a little, almost, in mud terms, almost a filter. And fortunately, this, the weld bond that I put on earlier this morning is thoroughly dried. So it will absorb a little bit, but not too much. And I'm using the stipple. Stippling is one of the things that a lot of the artists, one of the guys, all the guys who paint figures get into the stippling quite a bit. So and as you can see, I'm working from the bottom of the tank upwards, but I'm leaving all this alone. None of this is going to be touched by any oil paints at all. It's strictly going to be left alone. Now I'm going to flip it over so you guys can see the effect. And as you can see, the mud is starting to creep up the... Because you have to have your heavy, obviously, mud and heavy sand and what have you down at the bottom. But that's still going to mean that there's going to be mud and guck floating up to the top here. So you've got to add that on. You can't end here. Tanks don't do that. Mud doesn't do that. Look on your, F-150 that you've been traveling around in. Watch from the, the running gear up. It's a gradual decline of sand and what have you. So once you get that on, then we'll let that thoroughly dry. And then when we start to stick the muffler on, and I have the mufflers just nearby here. These mufflers are going to fit like so. And now the back end of the model is starting to come together. And as you guys remember from a week ago, when we were painting the cleats and the different things for the back end of the tank, now we're adding all kinds of color to it. Because now you start sticking these on, and now the back end of the tank is, looking quite good. You start adding a piece like that on, and you've got the 3 or 4 shades of mud. The muffler's got 3 or 4 shades. Suddenly the back end of the tank has got some interest to it. So I'm just going to let that dry a little bit, see how it unfolds drying. I'll get around to the front, and I'll demonstrate the same thing at the front just so that we can, again, lessons learned. And don't ever think for a minute, guys, that doing some of these steps, even though they're going to be down against the ground work of the model itself, the display part of it, the diorama part of it. Don't worry that any of these exercises go without purpose, because these are great learning exercises that take very, very, very little time. And you see there's that patch of grass. And what I might do when this is all said and done and dry, if I blow the airbrush on it now, all that nice MIG earth is just going to blow off the model. It's going to go down the channels of this Zimmerit that we've added, and then accumulate in the sides and all that sort of stuff. So you got to let it dry a little bit. But I'll bring out a soft color, XF probably 60 or something, and just give the grass a little go. XF 49, which is the khaki drab, and bring some life to the grass. But now, underneath this part, underneath the fenders of the tank, this whole process with this product should happen as well. So dab a little bit of this in there. Don't worry too much about the earth itself being up in here, and I'll tell you why. The King Tiger, as you guys know, is covered in road wheels, and the road wheels ride pretty high. Plus you have those gigantic fenders on here, so none of this effort is going to show whatsoever if you start clunking it on up into here. So the only thing that looks kind of neat is if you put a little bit of grass up in here, you know, from tossing the road wheels and the track. But all these things are going to come into play as we move forward towards the end of our project. We'll see by the time the torsion bars get lowered, I'll be able to visually see a little better how much exposure of this hull will be there, and then I'll act accordingly. I'll put on a little bit of grass, a little bit of this fresh mud sort of feeling. I'll probably stay away from, you know, our weld bond sand sort of mixture up in here. That's not where that sort of stuff accumulates. If anything, it's going to accumulate along these ridges, which are absolutely going to be invisible due to the road, you know, the road wheels that a King Tiger has, and they're not going to accumulate it up here. So these are all, I haven't whatsoever forgotten about any of this. I just know that those things are going to be determined by how the torsion bars expose the hull itself, and those are going to be lowered, as you guys know. So I'll let that be dictated to me later on in the project. So anyway, for today, we're going to close her down. This will dry, and if this needs a little bit of highlighting or stuff, when I get to the tracks next week, we'll reflect back on this for 2 or 3 minutes and talk about it. But right now it has to dry. And there's actually, before we go today, I'll just put on this other exhaust system, and there we go. So things are starting to happen back here. Like I say, this model is front loaded because of the shell hits and whatever. The interest will be at the front of the tank, but that's not how I like to model. I like to bring you guys all the way around. So we'll get the other things on there and bring some interest to the back end of the tank. All right, well, pleasure to talk to you guys once again, and we'll talk to you next week. We'll get into painting some tracks and getting all that ready. And we're almost to the conclusion of the King Tiger. Maybe we'll get up to maybe episode 12 or 13, and that'll be that. And then we'll talk about some possible groundwork in which this will sit on. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week. Take care.